Right. Let's unpack this. We're starting today with something that, well, it sounds like a move you'd make against an adversary, not a long-standing ally. Imagine this. You're a small, sovereign nation, a partner of the United States for decades, and then bam, you get a notice that the U.S. is going to suspend all visa issuances for your citizens.
It's a huge deal. And this isn't just about tourism or vacations. It's a fundamental diplomatic rupture.
Exactly. And it's focused entirely on the small, but very significant Caribbean nation of Antigua and Barbuda, AMB as it's often called. So for this deep dive, we're really getting into the immediate, and I'd say furious diplomatic defense that A&D launched. Our source material is pretty extraordinary. It gives us a rare, real-time look behind that diplomatic curtain. We have the official statement from the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, the Honorable Gaston Browne.
And this was issued, almost immediately after the U.S. proclamation landed.
Immediately. And this document, it's really a masterclass in controlled outrage, but also in legislative, counter-argument. So our mission is to dissect this response. We need to understand the exact U.S. grievance, which, spoiler, targets A&B's Citizenship by Investment program, and then analyze A&B's counter-narrative.
And that counter-narrative, it really rests on a series of very concrete, very recent legislative changes that A&B insists completely invalidate the whole U.S. action.
Right. It's a story of policy, perception, and a frantic race against the clock.
And to really get the stakes here, you have to understand the tension around these programs globally. We're talking about Citizenship by Investment, or CBI programs.
Can you just quickly break that down? What is a CBI program?
Sure. In short, it's a state-run program where a country offers you full citizenship and, crucially, the passport that comes with it in exchange for a significant investment.
And that investment is like buying a house.
It can be. It's usually one of two things: a large, non-refundable donation to a national development fund, or, yes, the purchase of pre-approved, often very high-end real estate in the country.
And for a small island nation like A&B, I'm guessing this is a pretty big deal economically.
It's not just big, it's an absolutely essential economic lifeline. This is foreign capital that funds their infrastructure, their tourism sector, their national budgets. It's huge.
Okay, so that's the upside for A&B. What's the downside? Why do countries like the U.S. get nervous?
Well, that's the friction, isn't it? These programs, they inherently create a perception of security risk.
Because it's a fast track.
It's an accelerated path to a powerful passport. So the concern is that wealthy individuals who might be, on watch lists or sanctioned or involved in illicit activities could use this to get a second passport without the years of residency and vetting that normal immigration requires.
And as we get into Prime Minister Browne's statement, we'll see this. It's like a collision of timelines.
Exactly. It's the core conflict. By A&B's account, the U.S. decision is based on historical facts, how their CBI program used to work a few years ago.
But A&B is demanding to be judged on their present reality, on the laws they have on the books right now.
It's the diplomatic equivalent of being punished for something you fixed yesterday.
Okay, so let's get into the proclamation itself. Section 1. The document from the Prime Minister, it begins by noting the action from the U.S., and the language is very formal, very serious.
He says his government took careful note of a proclamation issued by the government of the United States suspending the issuance of United States visas to nationals of Antigua and Barbuda.
But the devil, as always, is in the details, and the timing here is fascinating. This is not an immediate freeze, is it?
No, not at all. The proclamation is set to take effect at, and this is so precise, 12:01 a.m. on 1st January 2026.
So they have over a year. That's a very long lead time for a diplomatic move this big.
It is. It's not a sudden punitive sanction. It feels more like a measured threat of a future consequence.
What do you make of that specific date? Why give them so much notice?
Well, the precision of that date is really interesting and makes you think about the strategy behind it. If the U.S. felt A&B was an immediate security threat, they would have just suspended visas right away.
Citing an emergency or something?
Exactly. The fact that they're waiting gives us two possibilities. The first is that it's a kind of diplomatic pressure release valve. It's a way of acknowledging that A&B is an ally.
So it's like saying, look, we have a problem and you have until this exact moment to prove to us you fixed it.
That's one way to see it. It's a formal, public grace period. The second, maybe slightly darker interpretation is that this date is just an administrative deadline for U.S. agencies.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it might be the time needed for the State Department to update its consular guidance worldwide, for Customs and Border Protection to change its protocols, for all the various intelligence databases to be updated. It just takes that long to turn the ship.
But either way, it gives A and B time to mount a counteroffensive.
A substantive one, yes.
So what's the reason? What's the core justification for this looming visa suspension?
The U.S. specifically targeted the CDI program. The proclamation says it has historically operated without a residency requirement.
And the reaction from Prime Minister Browne is,
Oh.
well, you can feel it in the statement. He says the government is deeply disappointed.
That phrase, deeply disappointed, it really underscores that A and B sees itself as a responsible partner in the Caribbean, not some kind of security threat. They're genuinely shocked.
Let's really zoom in on that trigger, the lack of residency. From a security standpoint, why is that detail zero residency the absolute flashpoint for the U.S.?
Because in security and intelligence analysis, residency is it's the absolute basic prerequisite for effective on-the-ground vetting.
What does that mean, on-ground vetting?
It means if an applicant could just buy a passport and never even set foot in the country, which historically was true for a lot of these CBI programs, then Antigua and Barbuda is just processing paperwork. They're just a document transfer service. They have no opportunity for any practical due diligence.
So walk us through what that practical due diligence would normally look like, because vetting can sound a bit, broad.
Of course. So when someone has to establish residency, even for a short time, they are forced into the local system.
They have to show up.
They have to physically show up for an interview. They have to provide biometric data fingerprints, retina scans at a government facility. They might have to set up utilities, open a local bank account, interact with local police or immigration.
And each one of those steps creates a record.
Precisely. It creates a paper trail, a digital trail. And that is exactly what intelligence agencies value. It helps confirm their identity, it helps verify their financial claims, and it establishes that this person isn't just some abstract entity known only through, scanned PDFs.
Whereas the old way,
the purely transactional way, was just money wired, passport mailed. And the recipient gets this incredibly powerful travel document without any physical contact. They could potentially bypass years of standard U.S. visitor visa interviews.
So the U.S. saw A and B citizenship as a kind of security loophole.
A bypass mechanism, exactly. For potentially undesirable actors to get access not just to Antigua, but to the 160-plus countries that offer visa-free entry to Antiguan passport holders, including, eventually, the U.S. itself.
And this historical perception of a purely transactional, no residency program is really the foundation for this whole dramatic proclamation.
That's it. That's the whole ballgame.
And it's so important to remember, too, that this suspension affects all Antigua nationals. It's not just the people who bought passports through the CBI program.
And that's the key point that elevates this from just a bureaucratic spat to a full-blown diplomatic crisis.
Right.
If the U.S. had only targeted, say, CBI recipients with a citizenship date after 2020 or something specific like that, it would be very difficult for A and B to object. But by suspending visas for the entire population,
students, tourists, business travelers,
families with deep ties to the U.S. diaspora, it is, as PM Browne rightly sees it, devastating.
it must create so much anxiety.
Enormous anxiety. For ordinary citizens planning a trip, trying to attend university or conduct essential trade, it risks cutting off the social and economic conduits that underpin the whole relationship. And it makes A and B's defensive posture incredibly urgent.
Because they're not just fighting for their CBI program anymore.
They're fighting for the fundamental right of movement for their entire population. They have to prove that the U.S. justification is not just outdated, but factually, provably incorrect right now.
Which brings us to Section 2, A and B's defense. This is where we shift from the U.S. accusation to dissecting Antigua and Barbuda's counter-argument, and it is not an apology.
No, not at all. It's not a vague promise to do better.
It's an emphatic, direct refutation from Prime Minister Browne. He says, quote, "That assertion does not reflect the present reality of our laws."
I mean, that's a direct shot. He's basically accusing the U.S. government of making a policy decision based on stale data.
And the statement immediately backs this up with a clear timeline of their engagement, claiming that A and B was proactive long before this proclamation was ever issued.
Right. He highlights that over the past year, so this is the period running right up to the proclamation, A and B worked closely and constructively with several departments of the United States government to strengthen their CBI safeguards.
So they're saying they were already working on this. They're stressing that these were good faith efforts and that they accepted practical suggestions from the U.S.
And took concrete steps to make sure the program presents no risk whatsoever to the security of the United States.
That claim of constructive engagement is Well, it's where this whole thing becomes a real policy collision, doesn't it?
It really does. Because if AMB was actively consulting with U.S. agencies and implementing their suggestions, and they believe they were on a positive track,
Then this sudden public proclamation lands like a slap in the face.
or a severe betrayal, at best, it's a major internal administrative blunder within the U.S. government. It just reframes the whole narrative.
So AMB is basically saying, we were at the table with you, we were doing the work you asked us to do.
And you still sanctioned us based on the historical facts we were actively working with you to erase. And that creates massive leverage for AMB because it suggests the U.S. action lacked basic diplomatic courtesy and coordination.
So let's get into the specifics of those concrete steps. What exactly did AMB do that they feel makes this proclamation obsolete?
So the Prime Minister confirms a profound legislative shift. This wasn't just a minor policy change done by some administrative regulation. He says Parliament recently enacted comprehensive new legislation,
So top-to-bottom overhaul.
strengthening every aspect of the program. He specifically lists 4 pillars that were reinforced: due diligence, transparency, information sharing, and enforcement.
Okay, let's break those down. Due diligence sounds like the big one for security.
It's the most critical pillar. AMB had to move beyond just simple criminal background checks. The new legislation mandates enhanced checks, often with multiple layers of verification.
So that means checking against things like terrorism watch lists?
Exactly. Mandatory screening against global terrorism watch lists, Interpol databases for wanted persons, and crucially, checks against sanctioned individuals lists, like the US OFAC list.
And what about the money itself?
They also tightened the Know Your Customer, or KYC, and anti-money laundering AML requirements. This forces applicants to provide forensic-level proof of where their wealth came from, the source of funds verification, to make sure the investment isn't, the product of corruption or crime.
But wait, if they were working constructively with the U.S., as they claim, wouldn't the U.S. have been checking these databases for them anyway? What's new about the information sharing?
That's a really sharp question. The difference lies in the structure of the sharing. It becomes mandatory and legally binding.
Not just ad hoc.
Right. Historically, sharing might happen on a case-by-case basis or by mutual request. The new legislation likely incorporates specific legal agreements, often with third-party, highly respected due diligence firms that the U.S. and EU already use.
So it makes the process standardized and fast.
And immediate. It legally forces A&B to cooperate fully with foreign intelligence agencies about specific applicants. And it probably requires them to proactively flag applications from designated high-risk regions or from what are called politically exposed persons, or PEPs.
Which raises the bar for transparency, too.
Exactly. The transparency piece is vital for global credibility. This usually means clarifying exactly who is involved in the whole process, not just the applicant, but the agents, the investment promoters, the developers.
So it moves the whole thing out of the shadows.
The goal is to show the international community that the process is professional and, above all, accountable.
But the real clincher, the point that directly refutes the U.S. proclamation, is the residency requirement. If the U.S. said the program operated historically without residency, what's the specific change they made?
This is what the statement calls the critical safeguard. The new legislation introduces a specific mandatory requirement, a 30-day physical residency requirement in Antigua and Barbuda.
And it's a strict condition for qualification for citizenship.
That's the wording. It's not optional. Okay, 30 days. I have to be honest, as an outside observer, that sounds kind of minimal. Is 30 days really an effective security measure, or is it just political window dressing to tick a box for the Americans?
That's a great challenge. And if you compare it to traditional naturalization, where residency can take 5, 7, 10 years, yes, 30 days is minimal. But we have to look at the practical implications.
Compared to zero.
Compared to zero, it's a universe of difference. When the requirement was zero, the entire transaction could be handled remotely. A lawyer, a bank transfer, that's it.
But moving from 0 to 30 days changes everything.
It radically changes the process. The applicant now has to physically travel to A and B. They have to spend a month on the island.
And while they're there,
They are subject to that mandatory biometric enrollment we talked about, which generates data for international security cooperation. And they're required to engage with local officials, maybe finalize their investment in person, or attend a mandatory interview or an oath ceremony.
the physical presence itself is a hurdle.
It is. It forces potentially high-risk individuals, people trying to stay hidden, or who are under heavy international monitoring, to expose themselves. They have to book travel, stay in a known location for a month.
And for security and intelligence agencies, that's an observation window.
A crucial one. It's a concrete opportunity for identification and verification that simply did not exist before. So while it's not full integration into the society, it is a significant, measurable step toward physical vetting.
And A&B has clearly leveraged this specific rule to counter the U.S. Prime Minister Browne wraps up his defense by stating emphatically that because of this new legislation, it is therefore an error to state that Antigua and Barbuda's citizenship by investment program operates without a residency requirement.
That's classic diplomatic confrontation right there. PM Browne isn't arguing against the principle of the U.S. concern. He's not saying residency is a bad idea.
He's dismantling the factual basis of the proclamation itself.
He's saying your entire policy relies on an outdated premise. We fixed the exact problem you cited, and you are acting as if we didn't.
And that really moves the burden of proof back onto the U.S. government, doesn't it?
It does. They now have to either retract the proclamation based on these updated facts, or they have to publicly explain why they believe the new 30-day requirement is still insufficient, which, according to the statement, they haven't done.
And let's not overlook the psychology here. For years, the U.S. has complained about the zero residency model.
Right. And A&B, by legislating 30 days, has moved the goalpost to a measurable position. If the U.S. now says 30 days is not enough, they're admitting their real goal wasn't just fixing the residency issue.
It's about imposing a much stricter and maybe economically damaging standard on their ally.
Exactly. That changes the dynamic from a security correction to something that looks a lot more like economic coercion.
Okay, so the moment this proclamation hit the news, A&B didn't just issue a statement. They launched what you could call a full-scale diplomatic fire drill.
They didn't wait. Their goal wasn't to deal with this in 2025. It was to kill the proclamation immediately.
The statement details the very first step. A&B's ambassador to the United States, Sir Ronald Sanders, went straight to the U.S. Department of State,
which is the traditional established channel for resolving these kinds of crises. It's what you're supposed to do.
But here is the most revealing and honestly stunning piece of information in this entire document. Ambassador Sanders was told that officials within the State Department were themselves surprised by the proclamation and had received no prior notice of its issuance.
That is massive. The implications of the State Department being blindsided are huge for understanding how U.S. foreign policy can actually operate in practice.
Because they're the diplomatic wing. They're supposed to be in the loop.
They manage visa issuance. They coordinate with foreign governments. They are supposed to be the primary voice of the United States abroad. If state was surprised, it means a policy was being driven by another U.S. agency.
Like Homeland Security.
Most likely, the Department of Homeland Security, or the intelligence community, or maybe the White House National Security Council itself. These agencies prioritize national security enforcement and sanctions, and they often operate under different mandates than diplomacy.
I mean, can you imagine being the State Department official on the Caribbean desk? You're trying to manage this long-standing friendly relationship, and you find out via a public presidential proclamation that visa services for a key ally are being suspended.
It's a serious breakdown in the administrative machinery. It strongly suggests that enforcement and intelligence priorities just completely override diplomatic coordination.
And it backs up PM Browne's argument that the whole thing was based on old information.
It does, because if the State Department had been involved in the final policy review, they would have, or should have, flagged the very recent legislative changes A&B claims they communicated during their constructive engagement.
The U.S. government is this sprawling entity.
It is. And decisions like this often require sign-offs from multiple departments: Homeland Security, Justice, State, the NSC. The fact that the entity tasked with managing the fallout, the State Department, was kept in the dark suggests one of two things.
Either it was rushed,
or a critical piece of updated intelligence, the existence of the 30-day residency rule, never made it to the final decision-makers. It got lost in the shuffle.
For A&B, though, this surprise at the State Department is... It's a silver lining, isn't it? It means the enemy they're fighting might not be a coordinated policy machine.
It's bureaucratic confusion and outdated intelligence. It completely validates their strategy to fight this based on a factual error.
So once they realized the traditional diplomatic channel was sidelined, A&B immediately escalated. The statement says Ambassador Sanders initiated arrangements for urgent, high-level engagement with the State Department and the White House.
They're going straight to the top. When you bypass the bureaucracy like that, you're looking for an executive intervention. a rapid policy reversal based on the principle of partnership.
And the goal is clearly stated: to clarify the matter, to present the full and accurate facts, and to start the process of fixing this.
The urgency is just palpable given that January 2026 deadline looming. It's a high-risk strategy, though.
Why high risk?
Because they are forcing the U.S. President, Donald J. Trump, and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to personally intervene in what is, at its core, a technical administrative matter, a policy assessment of a single program. They are betting that the relationship is valuable enough to warrant that kind of top-level attention.
And the Prime Minister, Gaston Browne, confirms he is taking the appeal directly to them, writing personal letters to President Trump and Secretary Rubio.
Which just shows the level of economic and political threat this suspension represents for A&B's national security and, frankly, its economic survival.
Let's talk about that threat. Why is it so existential that it warrants this kind of direct personal appeal? It goes back to the impact on all nationals, right?
The economic impact is profound. First, tourism, which is the absolute lifeblood of the Caribbean economy.
Yeah.
It relies heavily on the ability of locals to travel for training, for business, for coordination with U.S.-based tour operators.
And then there's the diaspora.
The diaspora community in the U.S. is vast. Restricting travel restricts the flow of people and, just as importantly, remittances. It disrupts long-established family ties.
And trade.
Critically, trade. If your business owners, your logistics managers, your essential technical staff can't easily get U.S. visas, conducting trade becomes incredibly cumbersome. Goods might still move, but the human interaction required, negotiations, maintenance, quality control, it all suffers. It threatens the very trade surplus the PM later uses as leverage.
So in these high-level appeals, what's the key message A&B is sending? Is it a plea or is it a negotiation?
They're negotiating from a position of partnership, not as a supplicant. The Prime Minister offers the full engagement and cooperation of his government. He commits to address any remaining concerns and take all reasonable steps necessary to restore all visa categories.
That's a very shrewd move.
It is. They've already addressed the original concern, which was residency. Now they're offering essentially a blank check of cooperation on any other security concerns the U.S. might have.
They're basically saying, don't punish our entire nation for a historical issue we already fixed.
And if you still have concerns, tell us what they are, detail them, and we will legislate fixes for those too. We are your reliable security partner, not a problem country.
And that invitation to the U.S. to define its current security needs lets A&B control the narrative.
And prove its commitment to transparency and partnership. Very smart diplomacy.
Now, for a small nation to successfully challenge a major policy decision from a superpower like the U.S., they can't just rely on legislative facts. They have to leverage the political capital they already have.
They have to remind the U.S. why the relationship matters in the first place.
And the Prime Minister spends a good amount of time in this statement doing just that, anchoring his appeal in the foundational relationship. He states that A&B values its relationship with the United States, and he roots this bond deep in history.
Yeah, he notes that the connection predates the independence of both our nations.
Which is a powerful reminder.
It is. It's designed to resonate at the highest levels of the U.S. government. It's a reminder that A&B isn't some new transactional partner. It's an established democratic friend in the Western Hemisphere. The relationship is based on long-standing ties of friendship, shared democratic values, and close people-to-people connections.
And beyond the shared values, there's a practical security context here too, right?
Oh, absolutely. We have to consider that Antigua and Barbuda plays a significant strategic role in regional stability.
They might not host a massive U.S. military base, but
the Caribbean is vital for counter-narcotics and maritime security operations. A&B cooperates extensively with the U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. intelligence agencies on transnational crime, counter-trafficking, disaster response.
So when PM Browne brings up the historical ties, he's not just talking about old flags and treaties. He's referring to active, ongoing security cooperation in a critical region where the U.S. needs allies.
The implication is clear. Why would you destabilize a reliable security partner over a policy issue they've already taken concrete steps to fix?
Exactly. And this moves us seamlessly into what you called the economic anchor, which, especially for a U.S. administration that's very focused on trade balances, provides some very tangible leverage.
The Prime Minister makes sure to quantify this relationship in blunt economic terms. The U.S. is Antigua and Barbuda's most significant trading partner.
So that establishes their dependence, but he doesn't present it as a weakness.
No, because he immediately follows it with the critical detail. The U.S. continues to enjoy substantial and consistent trade surplus with our country. This is not an abstract economic point. It's a direct transactional argument.
Let's really analyze the strategy of including that detail. Why is the trade surplus such a significant point of leverage right now?
Because it shifts the whole debate away from security risk, which the U.S. gets to define unilaterally, to economic self-interest, which the U.S. values very highly.
A trade surplus means the U.S. sells more to them than they buy from the U.S.
Precisely. The U.S. is exporting significantly more goods and services to A and B than it is importing. In simple terms, A and B is a net buyer. They contribute positively to the U.S. economy, and they support American jobs.
So the Prime Minister is implicitly threatening that surplus.
He is. If the U.S. restricts travel and trade access, it damages A and B's economy, which in turn reduces their purchasing power. This risks shrinking that U.S. trade surplus. The message is simple. Punishing us is bad business for you.
It also challenges the narrative that the U.S. is just regulating a rogue security actor. It reframes A and B as an economically beneficial, historically loyal partner that's being targeted because of essentially bureaucratic inertia.
And think about the investment flow from the CBI program itself. Even if the U.S. dislikes the program, a lot of those investment dollars flow into U.S.-linked real estate development in A and B, or they're managed through U.S. financial institutions. Shutting down that source of wealth, even indirectly, has financial ripple effects that can be measured in Washington.
The statement wraps up with this very strong commitment to resolution from A and B. They say they'll do everything within its power to ensure relations continue on the basis of mutual respect, cooperation, and accurate understanding.
And that final phrase, accurate understanding, that is the persistent, subtle jab that really encapsulates A and B's entire argument.
They're holding firm.
They are. The fight isn't about whether security is important. They completely concede that point. The fight is about whether the U.S. is capable of acting on updated, accurate information that's been provided by an ally.
So this diplomatic document isn't just a defense.
It's an administrative challenge backed by economic and historical weight that is demanding a factual correction. The credibility of the entire U.S. policymaking process in the Caribbean is now on the line.
So what does this all mean for you, the person trying to piece together the complexities of global policy and diplomacy? What we've seen here is a major U.S. policy action driven by historical security concerns over, transactional citizenship, colliding directly with the current legislative reality of an ally.
And that reality is this newly mandated 30-day physical residency rule, which was instituted specifically to satisfy those U.S. security demands.
Our key takeaways are pretty clear. First, this whole conflict hinges on a factual dispute over A and B's laws. The U.S., it seems, acted on old intelligence, and A and B has the receipts, the new law, to prove it.
Second, the really startling revelation that the State Department was caught completely unaware. It suggests U.S. security policy is increasingly being driven by enforcement and intelligence agencies, and their mandate is superseding diplomatic coordination, which causes this kind of unnecessary international friction.
And third, A and B's strategic use of its trade surplus figure. It really elevates the matter from a simple security risk assessment to a negotiation about economic self-interest.
Which, it raises a very important question for you to mull over. Given the severity of the action suspending visas for all nationals and A and B's very strong evidence of their recent reforms, you have to ask, was this proclamation truly just a policy decision based on outdated intelligence? A simple administrative misfire that can be corrected with a few letters to the White House?
Or is there something else going on?
Or was this proclamation a deliberate, forceful geopolitical signal? Was it intended not just to pressure A and B into the 30-day rule, but to announce to the entire CBI community worldwide that a minimal residency requirement is no longer going to be enough to satisfy U.S. security demands?
So what happens now will set a precedent.
It will. If A and B successfully gets this proclamation rescinded based on their current laws, it sets a powerful precedent for other Caribbean nations with similar programs. But if the U.S. holds fast, it means the bar for allied security cooperation has just been raised dramatically, and 30 days of residency is merely the starting point.
This whole incident just underscores how urgently allies have to scramble when bureaucratic communication lags so dangerously behind these high-stakes policy changes.
And now, we await the White House's response.